Hello everyone, welcome back to our React tutorial series. In our last video, we talked about what React events are and how to use events like onClick, onChange, and onSubmit. In this video, we're going to explore more about React forms and how React manages form input effectively using controlled and uncontrolled components. By the end of this video, you're going to learn the difference between controlled and uncontrolled components. You're going to learn how to handle multiple inputs, checkboxes, and radio buttons. So let's dive into the real job. Before we proceed, we need to understand how form works in HTML and how form works in React. In traditional HTML, form relies on the browser to handle input changes and submissions. But in React, we need a way to track users' inputs and control the form state manually. What do we mean? Let's go over to our form component. This is our form component. In vanilla JavaScript, you would typically use document.querySelector to access the input value of this input. But in React, we use state to track input values dynamically. That is why we have here onChange event. We are calling this event handler. And just like we said earlier, React provides two ways to handle form input. We have the controlled method and the uncontrolled component. So let's look at what we mean by uncontrolled component. Here we're going to comment out our form component and we're going to create uncontrolled component. So what do we even mean by uncontrolled component? When we say uncontrolled component, we are creating a component and letting the DOM to handle the input state, unlike what we did here, where we're creating our state and tracking our form changes, our form inputs. So let's go ahead to create a form that will represent our uncontrolled element or component. So we're going to create a form. We're going to create an input with a type of text and a placeholder of enter your name, right? We're going to create this, but the difference is that we are not handling the changes. So it is not of our business what happens, right? And we're going to create a button with a title of please submit. This button is going to have a type of submit. And that is it for this. Then our form is going to have, of course, a onSubmit handler, and we already created a handler, which is going to be this handler. So we're going to pass in this and we're done here. We created a form with an input without an event handler and a button without an event handler. We appended the event handler in the form element. So let's go back to our handler component, our handler function. This is our handler function, which is of course is our click handler. So how do we manage to track the values of our input when we're talking about the uncontrolled component? So we're going to use a hook called useRef. useRef will be appended to the input, and useRef will help us to automatically track the changes in our input. So how do we do that? We're going to also import a hook called useRef. A hook called useRef. And how do we use that? We'll go over to our click handler function. We're going to create a variable. So after we've prevented the default behavior. So we're going to initialize our useRef hook outside of our click handler function. But what do we do next? How do we connect this ref to our input? So we're going to pass in this input ref as a prop to our form component. So we're going to say input ref, we're going to pass it as a prop. So let's go over to our component and of course destructure it here. And we're going to pass it to the input with a property or an attribute called ref, which is going to be input ref. So the ref is going to automatically track the changes in our input. So when we save this, and let's just make sure everything is working, everything is okay. Yeah, we have this. And if we go over to this place, we have our form components properly kept, and we have our click handler ready. And so finally, one more thing, since we are no longer saving our state, we're no longer tracking the changes manually. That means when we click on this input, when we start typing on this input, we are not setting any state. So the name here is going to be empty string because nothing is changing. So instead of saying hello, your name is Paul. So let's just try this out. So we're going to see what I'm trying to explain. If we go over to this place and of course go back to our code, if I refresh this and I try to fill in this form, say amenable Paul. If I click on this, something happens. Say hello, your name is empty, because while we are filling out this form, we were not setting any state, unlike what we did in our previous video. So how do we get the value of this input when we're typing? The value now is in our input ref, and we're going to replace the input ref. We're going to replace our name to input ref dot current. It has a property called current and a property called value. So the current property holds the value of the input. So if we save this, and just to make sure we're good, and we go back to our browser, we're going to see, if I clear out all of this and let's just reload our page, and I say amenable Paul. Oops. If I click submit, you're going to see hello, your name is amenable Paul. So this is how to track our input with the uncontrolled component. So we're not setting any state, we're just using the useRef hooks to manually automatically track our input state and get the value using the input.current.value property. Having gone through this and demonstrated how it's working, let's try to see how controlled components are. Controlled component is just like what we have in our previous video. We had a form component that has a handler. We also have an input that has a on-change event. So this means that we are controlling the values, the changes in our input. We are controlling what happens when a user types. We are manually tracking it using our state. So when we try to do this again, and just like we had in our previous video, if you did not watch our previous video, go back to it, you understand what we mean by controlled component. Just to make sure it's working, from our previous video, we'll save this, we'll go back to modify this. So instead of this, I'm just going to comment this out. So instead of input.name.ref, we're just going to comment out have name. So this is going to be hello, your name is name, because in this case we are setting the state. So if we go back to refresh our page and say amenable Paul, if I click on this, we have what we already have. So this is the basic difference between the uncontrolled component and the controlled component in React.js. Now, something very important. We've been managing just one input, and in a real life ideal situation, we cannot have just one input. If you want to register a user, the user wants to put in their full name, their phone number, their email, and of course their password. So let's see how we can manage multiple inputs in our form components. So here we're going to have multiple inputs. We have our name input already. We're going to create an input for email, an input for phone number, and an input for password. And we're going to give them, of course, how we are. And let's go back to our app.js. In our app.js, we created a state, and we're saying this state is form data, and the setter is a set form data. And of course, let's have a default value for our state. So the default name is empty, the default email, phone number, and password. So what is the next thing to do? Let's create a form, an input handler. So we're going to say input change handler, which of course is going to set our state. So this is where it becomes very interesting. Look at this clearly. What we're doing here is saying, when I trigger this event handler, copy everything, this using a spread operator, copy everything in my form data object, and then create new object. And the object you're going to create new properties. Rather, the properties you're going to create, the key of the property is going to be the name of the input. The value of the property is going to be the value of the input. That is what we're doing here. If this is correct, then we're also going to give our input name. We're going to use the name attribute to name our input. But before we go over to our component, we're going to pass the input change handler as a property of our component. So when we do this, we can as well go back to our input and pass it here as a property. And yes, what do? We already have our event handlers passed to our events, to our input component. So what do? We just have to make sure the name is correct, the email is correct, the phone number is correct, the password, and our handler is still intact. So if we save this and go back to our app.js, we go back to modify our click handler. What are we doing there? We're saying instead of having name, right, since our initial state is an object, so we can only access the name property using from the form data property. So here we can say form data.name, form data.email, form data.phone, and form data.password. So that is going to be what we have here. If I fill up my form and I submit, I'm going to say, hello, your name is this, your email is this, and so on. So let's try this out. Let's go back to our browser and our application, of course. Let me reload this and make sure we are in clear standing. And if I type in my name, I type in my email, and I choose my password, if I try to submit this, we have, hello, your name is Aminibo Paul, your email is aminibo@gmail.com, your phone is this, and your password is this. This is how to use multiple inputs in our form, and we are using just one state to hold all the input data. So the next we're going to check out is how to handle checkbox, radio buttons, and select field. So how do we do that? First of all, we need to create a checkbox input. We're going to say input, and we're going to give it a type of radio, and of course we're going to give it a type of name of gender, a value of male, a value of female, and we have input change handler. So we're going to also create a check button rather. We're going to create an input called checkbox, and we're going to give it a name as stem. We're going to give it a value of them. We're going to have on-change, and we'll say I agree to this. So if you want them to agree to conditions, we're going to do that. We'll come back to change to work on the on-change event handlers for the checkboxes and the radio button. But let's go back to our browser to see what we have. If I save this looks really ugly. So how do I do that? I'm going to break the line here. I'm going to break it again, and I'm just going to copy this and paste it here. So this should look a little bit beautiful, right? And I'm also going to paste it here. So this looks a little bit better. So we have the name. You can only select one for the radio buttons. We have the checkbox, and one more thing, we're going to create a select input. We're going to create a select input to select our language. So this is going to be language, right? And we're going to say English, Hindi, or Urdu, right? If we do all of this and save, if we go back, we have I'm also going to break the line here. And if we go back here, we'll have this. We'll have a name, we'll have the language, can select male, and I agree, and I do this. So if I click on this, what happens? Say, hello, your name is empty, because we did not fill out our names. Now, let's try to fill out our names and test out what we have before and make sure everything is working before we started the new one. So I'm going to click on this. We're going to see your name is actually working up to your password. So how do we track the select input, the radio buttons, and the checkbox? So we'll go back to our app.js to modify our, first of all, we're going to modify our state to accommodate the language property, the gender property, and the terms property. And we also come back here to modify our output, where we say, just see if I can break this. So it's going to be so clear. So here we're saying, hello, your name is this, your email is this, your phone number is this, your password is this, your language is this, your gender is this, and your terms is this. So let's see what happens. If I reload my page and I fill out all my forms, all my inputs rather, and I say, of course, I speak English and my gender is male, I agree to your terms, and I click submit. What happens? If you have, hello, your name is Aminibo Paul, your email is aminibo@gmail.com, your phone number is this, your password is this, your language is empty, right? You get that? Your language is empty, your gender is empty, your gender is male, your language is empty, your gender is male, your term is terms, your terms is terms. So why do we have all of this? Let me explain. If you go back to our form.jsx, which is our component, in a checkbox where we're supposed to have our terms, the value is terms. So let's change the value to agreed. All right, let's change the value to agreed. So if you click on it, it means you agreed. If you don't click on it, it means you don't agree. All right, and here let's have a default label, say select your gender, right? Select your gender. Let's have it as disabled. Select your gender. So if we go back here and reload our page, and no, not really, yeah, select your language. So if you have this here as your name, your email, your password, here we have select your language, and I select Hindu, I select male, and I agree. If I click on this, we're going to have, hello, your name is this, your email is aminibo@gmail.com, your phone is this, your password is this, your language is Hindi, your gender is male, your terms is agreed. So guys, this is what we achieved, having multiple inputs, having select inputs, having radio buttons, and having check boxes. That is it guys for this video. In subsequent videos, we're going to look at form validations as a topic. We're going to deal everything on form validation, how to validate if your input is empty, how to validate special inputs like password and emails. In this video, we talked about controlled and uncontrolled components. We talked about how to use multiple inputs in our forms and how to trigger events from special inputs like the select input, the radio input, and the checkbox. If you found this video very helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. See you guys in the next video.